Oh my gosh. Crazy J Podcast. That's amazing. Welcome to the Crazy J Podcast Show. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that was a bit too loud, but I'm recording this anyways. So welcome back, folks. This week, I'm going to have back-to-back episodes. One's going to be about Detroit Lions San Francisco game. The other one's going to be about my other subject about my passing of my father and what I've learned or what I haven't learned or what. It's really about being adopted. So listen to that whenever you get a chance. But here we go. Welcome back. I'm listening to Oasis on a record player. As the music's in the background, you guys can't hear it, but I'm going to go this way, this route. Here we go, folks. Detroit against San Fran. San Fran's been hurt. No McCaffrey. Putty's been hurt a little bit here and there and so forth. He did mysteriously go out at the end of the game in the fourth quarter for having a burning sensation in his arm. I think that's a little bit questionable. But we really got to talk about this group of people who keep insisting that Detroit should sit out their players. And knowing that the Vikings are in our division along with the Green Bay Packers, send out your players just for resting against the Vikings for the game of the week, which is going to be a number one seed. If Detroit wins, we have number one seed. We have the bye week. We have everything that we're asking for. We need that rest. But I think that we got to really talk about Dan Campbell. And I like to focus more on Dan Campbell's coaching. And I know a lot of people have a lot of issues with Dan Campbell's scoring and fourth down and everything else. And analysts on ESPN and maybe Fox Sports and whoever's out there, they're always talking about stuff that they don't roughly know, I guess. I mean, half the guys used to play football. But this is a different era of football. And this is a different football team. Detroit Lions is just a different team. And I think Dan Campbell, you got to go full throttle. And that's just his personality. I mean, I heard Troy Aikman talk about how he reminds him of a lot of Jimmy Johnson, but I think he's more like Mike Ditka. He's a tough ex-player, ex-NFL player, knows the goods of the game, knows how to prepare his players. I think if Dan Campbell sat out his players, and let's say we lost 31-14, 22, 24. It doesn't matter. If we got blown out or we lost by 5 points, that would have set a different pace for the next week game against the Vikings. And what I mean by that is that you're allowing your players to over-relax and overthink and maybe not overthink, but maybe not be being prepared for the following week against the Vikings. The Vikings have to keep winning games, and they did against Green Bay. So I'm talking in present and past tense at the same time. So saying that, Dan Campbell did the right thing. He's got to keep playing his players. He's got to keep Jamal Gibbs hot and ready. I mean, if you look at Detroit has everything to lose. Where last year and the year before, we had nothing to lose. We are the most attractive team in the NFL. We're the newest, we're the new America's team. Our fan base keeps going everywhere to follow our team, Detroit. We were all over in San Fran. We're just everywhere. And I think that when I mean we have everything to lose is that our tunnel of light is getting smaller and smaller because Ben Johnson might be leaving. You never know about Aaron Glenn, the defense coordinator. You just a lot of these guys, they may not come back next year because, or the following year because they're injured. I mean, again, we got Aiden Hutchinson who says he's going to be ready for the Super Bowl, but we can't even think about that far. We have to beat the Vikings. The Vikings are going to be our nemesis for the next 3 or 4 years. And maybe Green Bay, but our own division is something that we have to conquer. And I think that anybody that questions Dan Campbell, I mean, that's old school football. I mean, you're going to play you guys to the end. I mean, it'd be one thing if the Vikings were, like, say, 12-5 and Green Bay was 11-5 like they are now. And the Vikings had no chance of going up and down the ladder for the number 1 seed, or even with any other team. But to win the division, you're going to have to play your teams, and the Vikings were our last game of the year. So, you had Jameis Winston playing real well. I mean, I'll just go over the stats. This is something that I'm just going to go over. I mean, look, Jared Goff, 26 for 34, 303 yards, 3 touchdowns, was sacked twice. 1 sack was a coverage sack. The other sack was he should have got rid of the football a long time ago. For him to keep the ball in his hands, sometimes that's what gets him in trouble. Sometimes. But if you look at Detroit's rushing, Jamar Gibbs, Mr. Speedster himself, 18 carries, 117 yards, 1 touchdown. The end of the game, he had a touchdown. Craig Reynolds had 7 carries, 31 yards. Came in at a time where Jamar Gibbs needed some rest. So you have 152 yards in total, minus 2 yards of Williamson and 3 yards of Goff. But that's something that you have to address. That when someone goes down, like Montgomery, you have to put someone back in, and Reynolds came in and played his part. So shout out to Reynolds. Jameson Williamson, 5 receptions, 77 yards, 1 touchdown, 41 yards was the longest. They had a great play again, another Ben Johnson play where he set it up where St. Brown caught the football, and then they tossed it right over to Williamson. And Williamson, he said at the end of the game that the defender took the wrong angle and started going all the way to the end zone and scored a touchdown. Sam Laporta, he's been kind of quiet this year, but he came in big. But by the end of the game, for 6 receptions, 64 yards, 1 touchdown. He had a touchdown. He had a great game. We kind of miss him. We gotta, when players go out, you gotta go back to your starters, and he was ready. Amon St. Brown, he had 60 yards, 1 touchdown. It's funny, he had 8 receptions. I almost felt like he had more yards than that. But Jamar Gibbs had 4 receptions, 46 yards. So in total, I think he would have 150 yards in the whole reception, about 160 yards in total of reception and running and rushing. Craig Reynolds had 2 receptions, 35 yards. Allen Robinson, one reception, 21 yards. But on the defense, we have to shout out to Kirby Joseph, for making those 2 crucial interceptions in the second half. The defense came in. Our linebackers are wounded. I think Detroit will have issues with Adams of next week against the Vikings, but Detroit finds a way to win games, and that's something that you have to really consider. How that's what makes Detroit. Detroit wins games by sticking together. It's a tough year, tough. It's just football's tough, and it's a man's game, and it's just it is what it is. It's a man's game, and if you're not ready to play football, I mean, I don't know what you're ready for. I mean, I don't even care how much money you make or how much money you don't make. You're playing a game where you hit people and you're going to get hit. And I think that a lot of these guys, they're really, they really are Detroit Lions team. They're just playing together. I will say that Joseph, in the beginning of the game, he got into it with one of the San Francisco players. Both penalties was thrown. Was actually Arnold with the San Fran guy. Joseph came in and started pushing people off the side. I think along with Branch, along with Joseph, you have to put yourself together. You have to know when the fights are real, when the fights are just instigated just for an extra play for the other team. You just have to know what you're doing. And I think with Reader, he had a crucial offsides that helped San Fran with points. But those are the little key things that Dan Campbell is really concerned about. That this team still sometimes makes really stupid, boneheaded decisions, offsides or personal fouls. It's just something that you can't really imagine to do. But if I would go to the team stats in total, Detroit had about 287 yards in passing. Rushing, we had 152 yards. San Fran had 75 yards in rushing and over 400 yards in passing. That's a concern for Detroit. It's a very concern, but I think that's something that Detroit's going to have to. I mean, it's Detroit. They know their situation. It's nothing new to them. They already lost Hutchinson and a couple other players a couple weeks ago, or in the middle of the year. So that's something to consider it. What I will go over is the only thing I would say about this game for Detroit is that maybe the fourth down and go on the 8-yard line, and Detroit didn't make it. And I think Detroit could have gone for the field goal, because if they'd gone for the field goal, they would have been down 16-23, and when you don't do that, that puts your team in a hard spot. And I know Detroit comes back a lot of times. I mean, obviously in the second half, Detroit scored a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tie up the game. So it crossed off that fourth down try that they didn't make it. Detroit got lucky that at the end of the second quarter, when Detroit didn't make the fourth down conversion, they got lucky that when San Fran moved the ball downfield, that Moody of San Fran missed the field goal. And to be honest with you, Moody missed 2 or 3 field goals, and that would have maybe made the game a lot different than what it was. So Detroit should be considered very lucky that Moody was not feeling in the mood to hit field goals. So that's something that it didn't bite Detroit's in the ass. But if you take that against the Vikings or any other team with a good field goal kicker, and you go for a fourth down and you don't make it, and your opponent goes all the way downfield and score a field goal, that would have been 26-13, and you still would have been down by 2 scores, where Detroit was down by 1 score going into the second half. So that's something you got to consider. It. That's something that, I talked about Dan Campbell a lot. That sometimes I feel like sometimes he just doesn't know to let the game come to them. San Fran was going to come out shooting guns. They knew the defense for Detroit's linebackers were relatively weak. I know that Campbell for Detroit, he's been playing real well. So that's something that we need to prop him up for coming in as basically a backup linebacker. So again, that's something that I don't know if it's going to bite Detroit in the ass in the playoffs or even next week. If Detroit goes for it against the Vikings at home, I think you go for it at home on 4th down by the end zone and the 8-yard line. But if that game was at the Vikings Stadium at the end of the year and you were down 13-21 and you didn't make it and you still got the ball back in the Viking land, I don't know. I don't know if that would work out. So, but it works for Detroit. It works for Dan Campbell. You can't get upset with him because this is all we have. And it sounds negative, but it's not. This is just a new thing that Detroit has. And we never had this type of coach. And I always say we need an alpha male coach. And he's an alpha male. He is a guy who's going to tough things up. He's going to be a guy that's going there's no antsy-pantsy bullshit, no Cinderella crap on the football field. You're going to win football games, and we're going to win it. And if I make a bad call, I'm going to have to live with it. And Dan Campbell has made it clear that he's going to live with it. He's going to live with the idea that the times that they win for it and they didn't make it, he's going to have to live with it, and he's fine. And that, to me, is a true leader as a coach. Because if you're always trying to go for the field goals and you're always trying to punt the ball and you're always trying to play the field positions and all this stuff, it's going to kill you. And it happened in Detroit. And remember, Detroit used to live off field goals. Jason Hanson, Eddie Murray, old Detroit with Billy Sims, Barry Sanders. It didn't matter. We always went for field goals, and we were always down by 7 points. We were down by 4 points. We were down by 1 point. We came back with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford blew his shoulder apart. There's so many different things that happened. And Detroit, I don't know if Detroit doesn't remember those days of field goals. I mean, Jason Hanson should be in the Hall of Fame of anything with Detroit Lions. He should be the most valuable Detroit Lion player of all time over Barry Sanders for the most points in Detroit. Detroit kickers made a gold mine of money in Detroit. And Dan Campbell is making our players do things that are very uncomfortable. And that means playing every week. And that means playing every game. And that's like playing to the death of the game, the death of the minute, the death of the second. This is something that most people do not remember. And a lot of the national people who are watching Detroit, you guys don't remember all these stupid field goals and all these dumb punts and all this gibberish. It's just gibberish. I mean, but Dan Campbell, you got to stick with him because if you don't have him, I mean, I don't know what you're going to get because even if Ben Johnson, let's say Ben Johnson took over Detroit, I think Ben Johnson would be a perfect fit. But I don't know if he would be able to really motivate players that used to play under Dan Campbell and push the players in a way that he's going to route them up. Now, I think if Ben Johnson started somewhere else, like the Vikings coach, brand new, I think it would work out for him. But I don't think it would. I think the only way that Dan Campbell or Ben Johnson could fit in Dan Campbell's shoes, if Dan Campbell had a family emergency and he had to leave football because of his family or whatever. Let's say he was on a call of duty of military service, and Ben Johnson would take over the team. I think that would work. But Dan Campbell got fired. I don't know if that team would fit in with Ben Johnson. And I thought that in the past, I thought that they would keep Ben Johnson in case of Dan Campbell. But Dan Campbell has proven himself to be the coach of the year. And if he keeps it up, he might be the coach of the decade. I'm just saying, he could be the coach of the decade. He might be one of those coaches that are just gritty coaches from Texas, old school. There's no handsy-pantsy. There's no sitting out. There's no CeeDee Lamb feelings getting hurt. There's no Dak Prescott being a baby. You know, you're just not going to get a player like that in Detroit playing under Dan Campbell. You're just not. I would love to play under Dan Campbell. I would love to be coaching under Dan Campbell. I mean, even I would love to be a special teams coach and understand the difference of, schemes and things, and just learn anything about football under Dan Campbell. I think he'd be a great coach because I wouldn't be able to fit his shoes, but I'd be able to understand the game better. And then, because I'm a different type of person, I would believe that players would be able to adjust my style on a whole brand new different team. Remember, one last note. I remember watching a video of Dan Campbell, and he got hired in Detroit, and they were taking a walk around the practice field and everything else, and he got teary-eyed. He really did. So that says a lot. That says, like, this guy has worked his ass off, and he earned it. And I think that any analyst that talks BS about Detroit and Dan Campbell, I think you're out of the loop. I think any fan that thinks that Dan Campbell is a bad coach, I think you're out of the loop. Dan Campbell is old school, and you got to tough things up and go for it. So peace, love, and I'm out of here, folks. You can listen to my podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can get your podcasts as I put down my coffee. Thank you for listening. This podcast will be on Wednesday, not Tuesday. I mean, I know it's kind of amazing, but this is the only game of the week that I was able to watch, Detroit Lions game. But I'm also on YouTube, Patreon, anywhere you find podcasts, you can watch it there too. Peace, love, and I'm out of here, folks. I am out of here.